Let's go to the... let's just see what I've written, quite frankly. I wrote this about a week ago, so bear with me, everybody. I can't quite remember the match. So it's a rematch of a tag title tournament final from June. This is, by the way, Fabulous Freebirds versus Dynamic Dudes with Jim Cornette. Some overdub music, of course. You walk to the ring carrying the skateboards, and then you stick a hat on a kid and a thumbs up to the wrong camera. You both turn around going like that, and then, like that, which I thought was great. I really enjoyed that bit. Bad Street, or whatever their song was overdubbed. So I don't know, maybe the WWE doesn't own the rights to the Freebird song that they made for it. Jim Ross claims that Michael Hayes was the first person to use rock and roll music as an entrance song. Somehow I'm dubious of that, because there was a lot of entrance music happening beforehand, but he's probably the most famous for doing it. Jim Ross also says that both you and Johnny have degrees. So I always like that Jim Ross brings a little bit of the personal in with that kind of thing. Yours was in education, wasn't it, your degree?
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, my degree was in political science. This was 89. So, yes, I would have just gotten my education certificate right in 89. It was 3 of 89. I got my education certificate. I went back and took those courses. And the reason that was always so well known in WCW and NWA was we would take the G1, the private plane. And as we'd be flying back from wherever we were at that night, flying back to Charlotte, I'd be in the very back seat. You know, they had like captain seats, couches and stuff. It wasn't like a typical plane. And I'd have the light on and have my books and be highlighting my books. Everybody else is getting drunk on the plane, and I'm over there like bookworm Eddie. You know, it's but they had made a big point to talk about that. Because again, like you hear Jim Ross's call, and it was a deft call, where he says, you know, the business prior, you know, two different generations. These guys came into the business as teenagers. These guys got their degrees and are now coming into the business. But there's a lot of more oddities than that between me and Johnny. It's sort of like the Kennedy and Lincoln assassinations, right? Johnny and I both grew up in towns called New Brighton. He was New Brighton, Minnesota. I was New Brighton, Pennsylvania. He had started in the business and gotten his degree. When I say started in the business, he started training and playing in the business with no intention of, like, much like I did, to not get into wrestling, just sort of stay in shape while I was at college. He did the same thing because of his brother. We later then both get into the business. So there were a lot of like commonalities like that seemed strange. He had used his degree before he came into the business full time. I had been in the business full time and then left to use my degree. So there were these like sort of like Kennedy and Lincoln assassination comparisons, you know, that would come up between me and Johnny. Like I was telling Moose earlier, the thing that as I look back, the one thing that jumped out at me, as you can see, even as at that young age, I'm in pretty darn good shape. Our contract said that we had to be tan, bleach blonde, and have abs. So I would continuously get yelled at by the office and by the bookers and by everybody about Johnny. And I'm thinking, well, I ain't Johnny's dad. You know, I'm getting up and going to the gym every morning. It's not my job to hold his hand. Go yell at him if you want to. But you know, just those little things that you watch back to that and reminisce. You know, because once you hear the crowd going, they are. Like I said, I was just laughing my ass off earlier because I remember back then I used to get nauseous going into towns like that. Like, no matter how, it didn't matter how hard you worked, it didn't matter how good your spots were, didn't matter any of that. You were going to get chewed up and spit out. And then once you said, okay, well, that's what's going to be, just go with it. A lot easier.
Did your contract also stipulate that you and Johnny had to look super gay in those like neon shorts?
No, they came up with those things. Again, like the things that you look back and you remember as you're watching it. What looked really strange is I'm so used now to the fringe on my boots. Watching, you know, those moving around in those boots that they had made. They had those boots made, oddly enough. They had never taken measurements. They had Clifford Machias, the great bootmaker, long since passed away. Best bootmaker in the business. If you look closely, we have sharkskin toes and heels and eyelets up the sides. Sharkskin is almost impervious. So like patent leather will always wear out and crack and break off. Shark skin, it'll scuff, but you'll never wear it out. And that was how later when I would make the franchise boots with the fringe, I would always be with Clifford Machias. But those boots luckily fit me because I just got lucky, I guess. But if you look at Johnny's, when they would pull the laces up, like there was no, like the leather and leather touched together because they just made these boots blind for us without any measurements.
Where did the rest of the outfits come from? Because we've got like neon short shorts and the caps and everything like that. Was it just the style of the time, or was it?
Well, the neon, late 80s, everything was neon, right? Neon became the big color and go-to for everything. And, they were just because of us being together at that time is when they started putting those things together. I'm trying to remember who used to make our tights. I think Johnny maybe had somebody making them. And if you remember, there were times, I didn't even notice on this when we fast forward past it, where we would pull there were tearaway jersey or shorts that we'd wear over on the way to the ring. The problem was that frickin' Velcro. There were times when it would grab like it was bolted together, and so like going out, you'd have to like just barely touch the Velcro or it wouldn't rip off that easy. And it just became like this whole, like this side would rip right off, this side wouldn't or whatever. It just was so ill-conceived in the way it's played out. The interesting thing about the neon colors was that his name was Casey something. He was head of merchandising. And, Johnny, again, was always thinking business-wise. And so Johnny said, we got to keep him close, like keep him tight, staying good with him. So anytime we'd be at the bar, we'd always buy him drinks, take him out with us, that kind of thing. And that one year, the summer that Johnny and I were together, they had me, Johnny, Tom, Pillman, Brad Armstrong. They were doing the Great American Bash tour, like 75, 6 days long. The 4 or 5 of us we were to be at the building at 1:00 every day because they would do like a meet and greet earlier that day when they would sell tickets and stuff. So people coming through, they were selling the merchandise, of course, before you'd come through. And everything they put out of us sold because all the kids wanted neon stuff at that time. So they had hats, T-shirts, bandanas, sunglasses, bracelets, tearaway jerseys or shorts. They had like a ton of dynamic dude stuff out. And every day there's pieces of this coming through that we're signing. So the contract said a third of every dollar, a third went to me, a third went to Johnny, a third went to WCW. And so every day we're looking at these like just thousands of dollars of stuff coming through every single day. And I kept waiting for the merchandise check. Well, I was on the road at the time. My mom was getting my checks. And months go by. And she said, no, just the one check, just the one check. And finally I called home like 4 or 5 months later. And in my head, I'm thinking like, this is going to be worth like 30, 40, 50 grand for each of us, right? There's been a shitload of stuff come through. And I called home. My mom said, hey, you got 2 checks, one green and one yellow. I said, open the yellow one. So she opens up and she goes, I said, that's the merchandise. That's what I've been waiting for. And I'm talking about it. And she goes, well, it's not very good. I said, well, what's not very good? She goes, $9.98. I went, $998? Mm-hmm. She goes, no, $9.98. I about had a stroke. And so point taken about like the young green kid doesn't know like how, the angles that they get played in wrestling.
I think I've heard you talk before. You probably talked with me before how the dynamic dudes got. I don't even know really how you and Johnny sort of got paired up originally, but the character of the dynamic dudes, was this correct me if I'm wrong, a Jim Herd focus group kind of thing?
Yes.
Tell me.
Yeah, so Jim Herd, again, in his infinite piece of wisdom, had commissioned a study in California, with the thought being whatever starts in California works eastward, which is generally correct. Most fads start there and then work our way. the top 10 words or whatever, words or phrases, and the top two were dynamic and dude, or dude and dynamic, which I don't know which one was one or which one was two. And in his infinite wisdom, I take the first two words and put them together. That's going to make a great gimmick. Again, when I talk about the nuances, right? And Johnny and I had debuted with, Johnny had been the sheep herder's flag bearer, and we had gotten along pretty well. I think that was apparent to the powers that be that we enjoyed being around each other, traveling together and everything. And we had debuted on the Music City Showdown, which was the pay-per-view in Nashville that Terry Funk pile drove Flair through the table. And we had debuted on that pay-per-view as Johnny and Shane, the next generation or the new generation. And to this day, I can't remember which it was. And the next morning, we're in the hotel van to be taken to the airport. Eddie Gilbert is sitting in the front seat, and Johnny and I are in the second bench. And he goes, well, did you hear your new name? And my thinking, again, young and dumb as I was, I'm thinking, well, we already debuted. We're on a pay-per-view last night. Can't change our name now. And he said, told us about Jim Hurt commissioning this study and came up with the name Dynamic Dudes. And I said, okay, I started laughing, right? Sure, Joe, sure, Eddie. And Eddie had a real droll sense of humor. Eddie, one of these. And I could tell by his face, I stopped laughing. I went, please tell me you're fucking ripping. I said, that's the shits. That night we were in Bristol, Tennessee. Flair, I told you, was the booker. So I see Flair. And I said, hey, I got to talk to you about this. This is the shits. And he agreed with it. I think so too. I said, please get it changed. No, and I can do it. And I can do. And of course, if he stepped in and said, hey, this is a crappy idea. Because the way it was portended to us when they first gave the idea of the gimmick to us was that the Rock and Roll Express by now is getting old. There've been these different incarnations of babyface teams, and this was the idea of what the next babyface tag team would look like. And so the next or new generation was what they settled on. And when it went to that, everything else sort of that they had played out to us, once that name came in, didn't make sense. They wanted us to be that, white meat stuff. And if you look back at Rock and Roll Express, excuse me, Ricky was phenomenal at selling. Ricky was also great at firing up. When Ricky had to throw that fire, he could do all that. And somehow that got lost in that translation and fell to the wayside. Eddie Gilbert, rest his soul, had the idea of turning us heels. Like, give us like a 6-month run as this dynamic dudes thing, and then turn a stone cold heel. And of course, that never happened. So it was a shame. I would like to see what Eddie would have done with that. And ironic, because when I've told you the story before about Jim Ross, after Ricky and I were together, saying, "Have anybody ever told you you're a stone cold fucking heel?" And I said, "Yeah, Eddie Gilbert." And so it would have to wait till later before I would start to get that chance. But it was as soon as they tagged Dynamic Dudes onto it, it was dead in the water. It really was even the girls that had been coming with us, and we'd done a lot of tapings prior to that pay-per-view, and then of course the pay-per-view. The girls were coming, the guys were getting involved with it, getting behind a little bit, but as soon as they clamped that Dynamic Dudes on, it just went. It was untold to everybody.